Good evening and welcome to City Council meeting for March 9th, 2021. This meeting is being conducted under directives from Governor Sisolak. There is limited in-person seating available for this meeting. Public comment may have been made via voicemail or email prior to the meeting. We will also take public comment via phone calls during the public comment periods. Items listed on the agenda may be taken out of order. Two or more agenda items for consideration may be combined, and any item on the agenda may be removed or related discussion may be delayed at any time. With that, I'll call the meeting to order, and we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And do we have any public announcements this evening?
No announcements.
Thank you. We do have the administration of oath to office for Police Officer Brandon Blake and Public Safety Dispatcher Paige Schultz. Chief Shea, will you be introducing the officer and the dispatcher?
I will. Right up here. So our newest police officer and our newest dispatchers, and we're very happy to have him and look forward to introducing them to council and administering their oath of office. And then if I can have you just stand back where he is so that you're
on camera. And if you just raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Brandon Blake,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support, protect, and defend
that I will support, protect, and defend
the Constitution and government of the United States
the Constitution and government of the United States
and the Constitution and government of the state of Nevada
and the Constitution and government of the state of Nevada
against all enemies,
against all enemies,
whether domestic or foreign,
whether domestic or foreign,
and that I will bear true faith,
and I will bear true faith,
allegiance, and loyalty to the same,
allegiance, and loyalty to the same,
any ordinance, resolution, or law
and ordinance, resolution to the law,
of any state notwithstanding,
to any state notwithstanding,
and that I will perform well and faithfully
and I will perform well and faithfully
all the duties of,
all the duties of
state your position,
police officer
of Boulder City, Nevada,
of Boulder City, Nevada,
on which I am about to enter.
as which I'm about to enter.
So help me God,
So help me God,
under the pains and penalties of perjury.
under the pains and penalties of perjury.
Congratulations and welcome.
Thank you.
They have to sign anything?
Again, we do want to welcome you, Officer Schultz, or excuse me, Paige Schultz as the Public Safety Dispatch, and Brandon Blake as Police Officer. Mr. Blake, did you go through the reserve program here, or?
I did not. I actually did 4 years with Nevada Highway Patrol, and then I applied, and now I'm here.
Well, we welcome you here, and Ms. Schultz, how did you come to be a police dispatcher?
I've been doing medical dispatch for the last year, and so I've been over here.
All right. Well, again, welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, at this time, we will begin our initial public comment period. Public comment during this portion of the meeting is for items listed on the agenda. Each person will have up to 5 minutes to speak on a specific agenda item. And as always, we ask that you be civil and concise in your comments. The phone number to call is 589-9629. Again, this is our initial public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak on an item on the agenda, the phone number is 702-589-9629.
Public comments, state your name for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Cammie Perkins. I sent in a letter for public comment to the city clerk email as well as to the council members. I just want to make sure that you guys got it and that you can read it into the record.
I did. It came in at 6:10 p.m. So yes,
Okay,
I
and
have
are
it
you
here in
going
front
to-
of me. Yes, I'm good. I'll read it. Unless
Okay.
you want to go ahead and speak now.
I don't. I'd rather you read it into the record.
All right, will do.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Again, the phone line is available. Anyone wishing to speak in the initial public comment period, the phone number is 702-589-9629.
Public comment, state your name for the record, please. Hello? Hello? They hung up. Public comment.
Yeah, I'd like to speak, please.
Okay, state your name for the record, please.
Yeah, Robert Fonestock.
Go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, Council. Bob Fonestock. Just like to call in and talk about item number 7 and number 8. I know the folks at the airport would love to have an airport advisory meeting with the gentleman speaking this evening, Mike Williams. And we would like to be able to, talk and discuss things with him and then have him come back to the city, be given a chance. Not for sure what he's going to be speaking about this evening, but there are a number of concerns that I'm sure the airport advisory would love to discuss with him in regards to the airport here in Boulder City and the grant assurances that apply to those, and the grant assurances the city has enjoyed and utilized, like most recently the city ramp improvements. I think it was probably to the tune of, $3-4 million resurfacing a large section of city ramp. That city ramp is utilized primarily by one commercial operator at discounted rates, pennies on the dollars compared to the unapproved property that I lease, and just things along those lines. The same thing is like with my fuel trailers and the litigation with the city, and having the new fuel standards that are being discussed this evening as well, in regards to the city is going to be bringing a fuel trailer to the airport to service the city fuel farm, and that now will be legal. And my trailers, which are pretty much identical except much more sufficiently equipped with enhanced safety features than the ones that deliver to the city, and my trailers will become illegal. with these new regulations. The truck and trailer separation, I have had a truck and trailer at the airport since I've been in existence. Until the competition with the city did my truck and trailer become illegal. And the fact that the city competes and is taking away my right to compete and then taking over my customers are all situations that the FAA and those responsible for ensuring the grant assurances are well protected and the city is abiding by them should be discussed. And I would love to get a chance to have that happen. The city has recently discussed the use of the $3 million grant money. They discussed these fuel standards before, and there's just not nearly enough airport input on these matters for the people that are actually operating at the airport and paying to have the reason for the airport to be there, to be utilized, and these people are paying and need to be represented. I appreciate your time. Hope you guys will listen to common sense when it comes to what's needed at the airport and how we go about making it safer for everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you. The phone line is available. This is our initial public comment period. The number is 702-589-9629. This is the initial public comment period. The phone line is available. Anyone wishing to call, the number is 702-589-9629. Ms. McKay, there is written comment that's been submitted.
Yes, we have one.
All right, if you would go ahead, please.
This is from Cammie M. Perkins, attorney and counselor, regarding agenda item number 7. Dear City Council of Boulder City members, we represent BFE LLC. As you know, agenda item number 7 seeks to introduce Bill number 1895 to amend the Boulder City Municipal Code to add a section adopting the Boulder City Municipal Airport aviation fuel dispensing, handling, and storage standards. The proposed airport fuel standards, in parentheses, tonight's introduction of Bill number 1895 will be the 4th attempt by city staff to implement airport standards which are not in the best interest of the citizens of the city and are designed to discriminate against BFE. Among other things outlined below, the proposed airport fuel standards defined a mobile refueler as a vehicle having a cargo tank permanently attached to the truck frame. The only purpose of this definition is to disallow BFE's use of its fuel tankers, and there is no justification for such limitation. Further, this agenda item is premature. As recommended by the Airport Advisory Committee, the AAC, previously, the city has scheduled a working group meeting of individuals and businesses affected by the proposed airport fuel standards, which meeting is scheduled for March 10th, 2021 at 5 p.m. It is a waste of the council's time to consider adopting the proposed airport fuel standards before the affected individuals and businesses have even had a chance to provide their input. Second, BFE has offered fueling services at the Boulder City Municipal Airport for over a decade, as it is entitled to do pursuant to its lease with the city. As set forth in public comment correspondence submitted on April 13th, 2020 and April 20th, 2020, the city provides refueling services of its own at the Boulder City Airport, which directly compete with BFE. It is highly unusual and unheard of a scenario for a municipality to be in the business of providing fuel at its airport and competing with its own tenants. It is important for the council to understand that the reason the proposed airport fuel standards are being submitted to the council for action in their current form and specifically defining a mobile refueler as a vehicle having a cargo tank permanently attached to the truck frame is because the city does not want competition in its supply of fuel. The city's previous airport manager, Willie Williamson, specifically informed BFE that the city's former city attorney and city manager, both of whom were recently terminated, instructed him to make BFE's use of its fuel tankers illegal, either by restricting the gallon capacity or otherwise. The proposed airport fuel standards do just that. They would make BFE's use of its fuel tankers illegal. The definition of mobile refueler to specifically require that the cargo tank be permanently attached to the truck frame is illogical. The safest approach would require that the cargo tank be temporarily attached to the truck frame or able to be immediately detached in the event the truck malfunctions or does not start. If the cargo tank can be detached, another truck can be connected to it and ensure its ability to be oved immediately in an emergency. Aside from the illogical definition of mobile refueler designed to discriminate against BFE, the proposed airport fuel standards require multiple permits, 6 total, in order to offer fuel services at the airport. Again, requiring multiple permits only puts the city in a position to arbitrarily discriminate against BFE as well as other tenants in order to prohibit them from competing with the city if the provision of fuel. 1. The proposed airport standards were compiled with zero input from the advisory committee, tenants of the airport, or the FAA. A, the previous city manager and the city attorney were concerned with getting the proposed airport fuel standards passed because they did not get along with BFE's principal, Bob Fonestock. Respectfully, the former city manager and the city attorney had no experience with these types of regulations, and their attempt to implement them with no consultation with the AAC is not appropriate. B, no one consulted with the other major tenants at the airport, i.e. Monarch or any of the users. Of the 1.9 million gallons of fuel consumed by users at the Boulder City Airport, Monarch consumes approximately 1.6 million, and it was not even consulted about the proposed airport fuel standards. To our knowledge, no other tenants are in favor of the proposed airport fuel standards being implemented and is without any consultation with the AAC and others affected. This goes on, and they will be included in the minutes.
Thank you. Again, this is our initial public comment period. Anyone wishing to call, the number is 702-589-9629. This is the initial public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak, the number is 702-589-9629. We do have a couple members of the public in the council chambers this evening. Do either of you wish to speak in public comment? All right, we will close our initial public comment period then and move to the approval of the regular agenda. Ms. McKay, any changes?
No changes.
Madam City Attorney
No changes.
and Mr. City Manager.
Good evening, Mayor. We're asking for the removal of agenda item 5.
All right, thank you. Council, any changes?
No changes.
Councilmember Folda?
Thank you, Mayor. I am requesting to remove item number 7 from tonight's agenda.
Any other changes? I'm requesting that item number 12 be moved to the first item of the regular agenda, so it would precede item number 6. Any other changes? All right, I will move then to approve the regular agenda with item number 5 and 7 removed, and item 12 moved to precede item number 6. Anyone wishing to second?
I'll second. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We'll move then to approval of the consent agenda. Ms. McKay, any changes?
No changes.
Madam City Attorney
No changes.
and Mr. City Manager?
No changes.
Thank you. And we will bring it to council then. Any changes on the regular agenda? Or excuse me, consent agenda. Thank you.
No changes.
All right, do we have a motion then for approval of the consent agenda?
Wait, Mayor, point of order, Mayor. There's some changes to item number 1 on the consent agenda on the dais.
With regard to the minutes?
Yes. Did you want to make a motion to,
Pardon me?
did you want to make a motion to add those?
She made my changes, so I can make a motion to approve the minutes
As amended?
as amended.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we will then move to item number 12. Matters pertaining to the appointment of Deputy City Clerk Tammy McKay as acting city clerk. I guess this is on me then, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, again, we do have a resolution from the past that does name the, or allows for the deputy city clerk to serve as the city clerk. However, I think that we do need to come to a formal decision regarding that. So we do have resolution number 7253, which does appoint Ms. McKay as the acting city clerk. Ms. McKay, would that arrangement be agreeable to you as defined in Resolution 7253?
Absolutely. I'm happy to serve as acting city clerk.
Thank you. Any questions from council? Okay, and as noted in Resolution 7253, the base salary would be at a level of the previous city clerk. That has frequently been the process that's used until the appointment of a city clerk, a permanent city clerk, wherein the salary would be determined by a majority vote of the council at that time. With that, then, I would move for approval of resolution number 7253.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Ms. McKay, again, thank you for stepping up for this position.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm happy to do it.
Thank you. All right, we will then move to item number 6. Introduction of bill number 1894, amending the building regulations. This is a bill introduction.
Mayor, I'd like to introduce bill number 1894 with the title, waive the reading.
Introduction of Bill Number 1894, an ordinance of the City of Boulder City, Nevada, to amend Boulder City Municipal Code, Title V, Building Regulations, Chapter 4, Plumbing Code, Section 5-4-4, Amendments, to modify the minimum standards for plumbing fixtures.
And this bill will be heard.
It will be considered at the March 23rd, 2021 meeting.
Thank you. All right, we'll move to item number 8, discussion and information provided by Mike Williams and Robin Hunt from the Federal Aviation Administration. Mr. Bolt.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is Bryce Bolt, your administrative officer. We have on the phone this evening, okay, we will soon have on the phone this evening, 2 representatives of the Federal Aviation Administration to answer questions regarding the Boulder City Municipal Airport. Mike Williams represents the Federal Aviation Administration as the manager of the Phoenix Airport's district office. In 2012, Mike was selected as the assistant manager for the Phoenix field office and charged with establishing a new remote field office for the agency and leading the office transition to the Phoenix Airport's district's office.
One moment.
Mike was selected as a manager in 2013 for the Phoenix Airport District Office, which was established in 2014. The ADO serves airports in the states of Arizona and Nevada. Prior to joining the FAA, Mr. Williams served as the Director of Airports for the County of San Bernardino, where he oversaw a system of 6 general aviation airports, and prior to that, Mr. Williams was employed as the development manager for the Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport Authority. Robin Hunt is also joining us on the phone. Robin is currently the Deputy Director for the Western Pacific Region Airports Division. She's responsible for planning, direction, implementation, and evaluation of airport programs in the Western Pacific region. That would include Arizona, California, Hawaii, Nevada, and the Pacific. Robin joined the FAA in May of 2008 as manager of the San Francisco Airport's district office. As the manager of the FAA in San Francisco Airport District's office, Robin is responsible for airports in Northern California. She was responsible for airports in Northern California and Nevada. Prior to joining the FAA, Robin spent 19 years with the Department of Transportation Office of Inspector General. In that office, she served in various senior executive services and regional management positions, including Deputy Assistant Inspector General for Aviation and Special Program Audits. She received her bachelor's degree in accounting from the University of Kansas and is a certified fraud examiner. And I welcome them tonight, and they'll be answering questions that they have in front of them, and then any other questions you might have. And I will let Mike and Robin take it away. We have them on the line?
Yeah, are you both on the line?
Yes, Mike Williams is here.
Do you want to go ahead?
Mike, you want to start?
Well, good morning, or good evening, I should say, Mayor and members of council. Mr. Bolt, thank you for the introduction. Robin and I are glad to be with you this evening. Wish we could do it in person, but we all know that our current times don't allow that. Mr. Bolt gave you some background on our office, what we in the Office of Airports with the Federal Aviation Administration does. We're happy to serve and work with the airports in Arizona and Nevada. And, you know, we have this professional staff that in the office in Phoenix, but then we also have additional expertise in our regional office in El Segundo, Los Angeles area of California. We know that several members of council had some questions for us this evening. We're happy to, again, dialogue and have this time together. One of the purposes, one of the principal functions of our office is regarding the administration of the Airport Improvement Program. The Airport Improvement Program is a airport development federal assistance fund that has been established. It has various items of eligibility, but they are focused on really the core parts of the airport, kind of starting at the runway of the airport and then moving out to the other parts of it. AIP funds come from two principal sources. There's a tax on commercial airline tickets and taxes on aviation fuel sales. So the funds are generated by the users of the aviation system within the United States. Of course, in this pandemic environment, we've had some additional funds that have been made available by the Congress. CARES, C-A-R-E-S, is a program that was established last fiscal year, and it does come from the general fund. There has been some supplemental funding, as we call it, which also comes from the general fund. And the latest round of funding is termed CRISA, and that also is general fund as well. In addition to the funding, we work with the airports on various subject matter expertise related to airport engineering, safety, design standards, environmental planning, financial assistance, and grant assurances, which are what the city has obligated to by the acceptance of AIP funds. I think I'll pause there. And Robin, did you want to add anything so far, or would you be happy to answer any questions that council has?
We could go to the questions, I think is probably best.
One of the questions that was posed to us is, in light of the pandemic situation and the downturn in all sectors of aviation worldwide, how are our future funding levels going to be determined? We have a funding source that's called entitlement funding, and it provides funding allocation based on the size and activity of the airport. In this case, again, because of the pandemic downturn, the Congress has taken some action in the federal fiscal year 21 appropriation bill such that there'll be options about using either federal fiscal year 18 or federal fiscal year 19 passenger employment data to calculate the amount of funding for fiscal years 22 and 23. So steps have been taken to, in a sense, make allowances for the downturn with the pandemic. We have some questions as well related to an airport master plan and what that is. The airport master plan is somewhat, as the term implies, it's a forward look at not only the current status of the airport, but it does make forecasts for growth projections and how to accommodate that growth safely and efficiently. It is an iterative planning process that the airport sponsor, or owner as we term them, which in this case is the city, initiates to move forward, and we look at various things related to, again, runways, taxiways, the remainder of the airfield, safety standards, where and how the airport would grow to make accounts for hangars or other types of aviation facilities. And that is a process that an airport sponsor elects to do. The master plan is their document. It belongs to the airport sponsor. The FAA does have two specific approvals that we make in that process. One is the aviation activity forecast, and the second item is the airport layout plan. And just because a project is shown on the approved airport layout plan does not automatically guarantee airport improvement program funding. We still have to go through specific planning, justification, and NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act.
So, Mike, one thing I'd actually like...
Go ahead, Robin.
I was going to say one thing I would add about the master plan is, as you stated, that is the airport owner's document. And, you know, just because an item is on a master plan, the airport sponsor or the airport is not required to build that. I think it's important to understand that the only requirement as part of a master plan is usually an airport layout plan, which you mentioned we approve, and a project must be on an airport layout plan for it to be funded with AIP or federal funds. But frequently an airport will have projects on an airport layout plan or items in the master plan that never actually get built, because again, it's a plan, typically a long-range plan, and things change over time.
Would it be appropriate for members of council to jump in when they're addressing certain questions if we have questions in that general vein at this time?
Yes, that's perfectly fine with us.
Perfect. So kind of following along those lines, as you know, membership on councils can change, then therefore policy and direction can change as well. If there are concerns with some items of the master plan, I know it was just said that we don't necessarily have to go forward with it. Is there a recommended process for how to address those? Or should it just be, following through and starting the master plan again, at the next appropriate time? Or is it something that is recommended for the city to actually look at and address those areas of concern?
The guidance that we have is that generally the airport master plan should be updated every 5 to 7 years. Now, that's not a hard, fast rule. Things can change dramatically at an airport, or as you mentioned, there could be, different thoughts about the direction the airport wants to go. So, the airport sponsor, in this case the city, you could make a request to conduct an airport master plan at some point in the future. If you'd like to get AIP funding for it, then we, can program that and work with you on, the timing and when that may happen. The city could elect to fund an airport master plan on its own. Again, we would ask, there are federal requirements about it, how you develop it, the planning standards, and ultimately, again, that come and help with the approval of the forecasts and the airport layout plan.
And in the end, just to
address your question.
Yes, definitely. I appreciate it. And then just to reiterate, there is no obligation for a city to move forward with any one development or anything that's necessarily on that master plan. Is that correct?
That's correct. Even, we looked at projects on the approved ALP. We still have to justify it. We still have to do the formal planning. There is the environmental component to the project. And then, of course, there's a financial planning component to it as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, I sort of have a philosophical question about this. If you, at one point, the master plan is looking like the people who put it together were encouraging growth or had a vision of growth. And then you have people looking at that master plan several years later and saying, well, gee, we don't want to grow like that. We want to keep our communities small. We want to limit the number, how big of an airplane can land in the airport. Not really interested in extending runways or so on. Is it something that you keep in mind that would be better to leave it and have and go with the philosophy at the time, or to change it more frequently based on current thought of what the community is going to look like, what the airport should look like? Does that make sense? Is that?
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. Philosophically, I am an airport manager person by my profession. I'm always a fan of interactive, collaborative planning processes that allow people to engage and discuss and talk about, what they want their future to be like. We've seen airports that, have a lot of energy expended in a master plan and don't wish to change direction. We've seen communities that have scenarios that, much as you described, in that, it's been some time, it's been some different people, we have different expertise or thoughts, and so we'd like to take a look at, what the master plan says. And again, we're happy to participate with that and help the city if you should desire to relook at things.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes. I think most of us would like to see the airport stay like it is as far as size. What would you have to go through in order to extend the runway or to make a new runway? Would that be a large process, or is that something that could happen rather easily?
Runway extensions are always a complex process, no matter where they're at. We see almost every airport that we work with has a proposed runway extension shown on their ALP. It's not uncommon. However, taking that step to actually construct it involves a lot of planning, a lot of outreach. It involves, a significant environmental component. It can be a very controversial topic within a community. So, it's not an easy process by any means, but if it is driven, by the demand and desire for the airport, then, it can, move forward, but it is a challenging process.
And Mike, I think what I'd like to add to that is the statement you made about the demand. I mean, people can have desires for runway extensions or new runways, but it really has to have a strong, support for it being needed and necessary, not just a build it and they will come type of a concept. We really have a lot of extensions, like Mike said, that people want, but they never get built for various reasons. Some of it which can be there just isn't a justification to build it.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? I do have a question regarding the CARES Act funding that you had mentioned earlier. That has been an issue that has been brought up as far as having the city of Boulder City use the money that was received for that to forgive or to lessen lease payments from the fixed base operators at the airport. Is that a possible use of that CARES Act funding that you're aware of?
So the real true focus and intent of the CARES Act was to help the airports remain solvent, both from an operational and fiscal perspective. The great majority of CARES funds that we have seen is just really to reimburse for operational costs at the airport. We've seen, a lot of staff time at other airports and what people have reimbursed for. There are some provisions that CARES can be used for, but it is very restrictive in that sense. We do have some guidance that is available on the public website. And Robin, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think what I'd like to add to that is the fact that the CARES grants are to reimburse for expenses you've incurred. So if you're talking about, it has to be an operating cost of the airport. So if you cannot, some airports have asked, could I reimburse myself for the fact that concessions didn't pay rent? Well, you can't reimburse yourself for that because that's lost income, not an expense. And paying, I'm a little unclear exactly what you guys are kind of trying to get at, but you couldn't write checks to your tenants either because that's not a normal operating cost of your airport.
Well, the question that has been brought up by some of the fixed-based operators is since they have suffered losses due to the pandemic, the business of their fixed-based operations has fallen off significantly, that the city forgive their lease payments or make some sort of accommodation for them not having the revenue that they normally would have had if it had not been for the pandemic restrictions on flights.
Right, and CARES money cannot be used from that. A lot of the airports around the country have given either rent deferments or they have, adjusted the rental for concessionaires or other tenants at the airport. Around the country, there's been various ways that people have tried to reduce what those entities have had to pay to the airport. And we actually on our website have an entire FA frequently asked questions about, what is allowed and what is not allowed for those type of offsets. But you can't reimburse yourself for that with CARES.
Well, again, what I'm getting at is not reimbursing the city, but essentially writing off the lease payments that the fixed-based operators owe as a result of their lease wording.
And again, because that is really revenue that you didn't collect. That's not an expense, it's a loss of revenue. And CARES has to be an actual expense you incurred, as Mike indicated, for, payroll that you've paid to your own airport employees or, normal maintenance. Debt service can be paid off with the CARES, but it can't be used to offset a revenue that you didn't collect.
All right. Another question I had that sort of has been part of this discussion already is what ability does the city have to control the size and scope of an airport? And I put that in the context that Boulder City is the only city in the state of Nevada that has an ordinance which controls the amount of growth that the citizens have desired here. So this city has, for 40 years now, the residents have said that they want to see the city remain small. And if we look at the airport as a municipally owned facility, what ability does the city have to determine what size and what type of activities occur there?
So there are some limitations in that regard, and that comes with the grant assurances that the city agreed to with AIP funding. Essentially, it's a public use facility. So, placing limitations on it is challenging at best. Robin, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think that it's just important to realize that the grant assurances require you to make the airport available for aviation users. So the city cannot restrict who can use the airport directly. You can't say, I don't want Mike to bring his aircraft in because I don't like Mike, or I don't like, Robin, or I don't want a certain size aircraft to come in. You can't restrict who comes into the airport. Now, there clearly are restrictions on who can use airports based on the type of facilities that are available. But you cannot have a city ordinance that would say a certain type of aircraft cannot come in or can't come in during certain hours or anything like that.
And I guess that it kind of gets to the heart of the concern that I have. It's not so much what the city desires then, it's what the demand of the aviation industry is for use of the airport is what drives the process. At least that's what I've seen, where the FAA is not really interested in the communities where an airport may be located. They're interested in promoting the aviation industry. So if there's demand for certain features at an airport, the FAA expectation is that those things will go forward. Is that an incorrect statement?
I wouldn't, completely agree with your statement, sir. Sure, we promote the aviation system, but there is a process in many facets for the local community to weigh in about their facility and how it impacts their community. As we mentioned previously, just because a project is shown on an approved airport layout plan doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to move forward. It does get looked at, very carefully. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but I wouldn't 100% agree with your statement.
Well, let me try and word it a different way. If an airport user, whether it be a fixed-based operator, or just a general aviation person were to say, there is demand that exists to do a runway extension, would the city have the ability to say, regardless of the demand that exists and that can be shown, we're not going to do that? Would the city have the ability to do that?
I would say that, the city could certainly make that case.
But we might
users
endanger
do
the
have-
FAA, we might endanger these assurances that everyone keeps talking about if the city were to take that type of action where there's been a demonstrated need for increased aviation operations. That's my reading of this whole grant assurance thing.
And
No, I disagree.
Robin, go ahead.
I disagree. The grant assurances don't force you to build facilities. So the grant assurances don't say, you have to build a runway extension. What they say is you can't not maintain, you have to maintain the infrastructure you have in a safe condition, and you have to let users have access to that. So, but it doesn't say that you have to, put a runway extension in, or if people wanted, 5 additional hangars, that because they want hangars, you have to go out and build hangars. They don't require you to build things. They require you to maintain the facilities you have and to operate them in a safe manner.
And if that safety were to be endangered by the increase in activity that may occur, would that then drive any type of change at the airport? So I guess, let me just give an example. If we were to see the number of operations increase by 50% at the airport, and the statement is then, well, you need a new taxiway, or you need a new runway, or you need more hangars as a result of that increased activity, and the activity is documented, it is known to have occurred, would the city be able to say then, well, we just can't accommodate that increase in traffic?
You can't not allow them to come. You don't have to build a hangar for them to park in. You don't have to extend your runway so that a different kind of aircraft could start coming in. I mean, we have a lot of airports in California where the aircraft ideally would have a longer runway, but the local government is not extending the runway, in some cases because there's no place to extend it. In other cases, it's too expensive. There's environmental impacts. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. So you're not forced to extend your runway to accommodate them.
Thank you. I'm not referring necessarily to a change in the type of aircraft. We have a number of helicopters that use our airport, and apparently that's where much of the safety concern is coming about, is how those helicopters operate with regard to the runway directions. So again, it's not a change in the type of aircraft, it's a change in the number of flights that occur, that improvements are being requested or being driven by that increase in activity.
Well, and I think that people will probably bring to your attention if there is some issue where safety could be a concern. And there are airports that build facilities, build a new taxiway to, make the operation safer. I mean, it's ultimately the city's airport. It's ultimately the city's liability. But the FAA is not going to we don't have the power to force you to build a new taxiway.
or control tower or hangar space or any other improvements on the airport?
No, I mean, the control tower, that's something that the city has to decide you want to build. I mean, we'll give you AIT funds to help pay for it, but we're not going to mandate that you build it.
And again, it seems that the only reason why that condition exists is because of the increased activity. But as a city, we could not limit the amount of activity at the airport. It can just continue to increase without changing types of aircraft or anything else. Just the number of operations continue to increase, and the city has no ability, or do we have ability to be able to say, you know what, the airport cannot handle this level of traffic, and so therefore we need to reduce the number of operations that occur. Is that possible?
No, you cannot say you're going to reduce the number of operations.
So if any operator on the airport decides, you know what, I'm going to triple the number of aircraft that I fly in and out, I'm not going to change the aircraft type, I'm just going to bring in that many more aircraft, the city would not be able to stand in the way of that type of development?
Well, they have to have a place to land.
Well, there's plenty of space for them to land right now.
Okay, because that's, that kind of becomes the restriction at some locations is, the airport may not be able to restrict how many aircraft come in, but at a large commercial service airport, you may end up with, there aren't enough gates, so people end up waiting on the aircraft, or the aircraft end up circling around the airport because there's just not enough space, but they're not prevented from coming in. Then, kind of economy takes over. And people don't want to wait on the airplane for 2 hours to get to their gate. So,
right, but that's
having
not
delays and.
Yes.
But if you got place for them to land, then you can't say no, they can't land there.
Okay, regardless of how many. I mean, as long as there's space or economy, and we're not really talking about any safety guidelines or anything else. It's just if it can happen, it must happen. Does that boil it down?
Well, but it has to happen safely.
And the determination of that is made by whom?
Well, I would say it's a variety of, it depends on the specific situation. I mean, there are some elements of safety that we in airports are responsible for. There's parts of safety that air traffic organization is responsible for. There are portions of safety that the flight standards, which deals with aircraft and the pilots, are responsible for. So you really have to get into the specifics, but obviously nobody is going to force or want people to operate in an unsafe condition.
Right, but what I'm getting at is what ability does the city have to say if a determination is made that the environment has become unsafe, to say that rather than doing any improvements or expansions or anything like that, we say that this is as much as this airport can handle and no additional activity can occur.
I just can't think of, I can't think of a situation where that happens. But I guess I will I'll give you a related situation that maybe helps to answer that question. We have instances where parachuters want to drop in certain locations. And in those cases where there's concern that it may not be safe, FAA will do a safety study to determine whether or not that drop zone is safe. So we're talking not in specific, so it's hard to answer, but there are cases where FAA will do studies to determine whether something is safe, and if it's not safe, we won't allow it to occur.
Well, would that then apply to the number of operations? In other words, if the number of operations that are occurring is what is causing a safety concern, can the number of operations be capped or reduced?
I'm not aware of that ever having happened.
So the number of operations then is unlimited, and other things have to be done to allow for ever-increasing operations to be done in a safe manner. Is that another way of saying that?
Well, I don't think I would absolutely say that because, as I mentioned before, I mean, operations are going to naturally, at some point, even with helicopters. I mean, they can't fly into each other. They have to have spacing, so there's a certain amount of space and time that goes into the calculation that nothing is unlimited. There's always going to be a limit.
And how is that determined? How is that limit determined?
I think I mean, again, we're talking philosophical, and I think it depends on the situation and what study would need to be done.
Well, I don't want to make this seem as though it's just a rhetorical or esoteric discussion, because that's the situation currently. Is we're being told that due to the increase in number of operations at the airport, certain improvements are needed at the airport in order to do things safely. So number of operations go up, safety becomes a factor, improvements must be made to improve that safety. That's the situation we actually are being presented with now. That's a reality.
And what's the improvement that you're being told you need to make?
Primarily a control tower, but also elevation changes on one of the runways and the length of the runways.
Well, again, the city can decide they do not want to have a control tower. My understanding, the city had applied to be in the contract control tower program, but you do not have to. That's your choice. The FAA isn't going to say you have to build one. That's your choice.
But the city the city would not have a choice to say, we choose not to have the control tower, and another way to address this issue that's being presented by the increasing number of operations is to decrease the number of operations.
Well, I don't think that is a direct relationship. There's a lot of airports in the country that would love to have a control tower.
And every once in a while you run into a community like Boulder City where that may not be popular among the residents.
And again, the FAA is not going to tell you you have to build a control tower.
All right.
I'm not an air traffic expert, and maybe it's something that you guys should talk to the air traffic controllers about. But it's Flight Standards, is the group that regulates the operation. So if there were complaints about unsafe helicopter operations, then Flight Standards would come in and look at that. If you had a control tower, they'd be the one that were, to some extent, controlling some of the helicopters. So they would be making sure as another level of safe operations.
Well, the pilots themselves
But-
have responsibilities with their licensing as well to operate in a safe manner, don't they?
Absolutely.
And the fixed-based operators also have an obligation that if the conditions on an airfield are a certain way, they have a determination to make as well whether they can safely increase the number of operations they engage in.
Well, most fixed-based operators aren't engaging, they're accommodating aircraft that are coming in, unless they have their own aircraft.
Well, we do have, here, we do have fixed-based operators with their own tour operations, so they own the aircraft. They own and operate the aircraft.
So clearly they have a desire to operate those aircraft in a safe manner. I mean, they're got their own liability and risk if they're not doing that, correct?
All right. Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Bridges?
I know we're going around in a discussion about this. I'm not sure how much you know, but the issue of the air traffic control tower has come up because we're talking about our capital improvement plan for the airport and whether or not we're going to look at funding that CIP. And there are those who think that air traffic control tower is a great idea. There are those who think that there's a correlation between traffic, noise, activity, and an air traffic control tower. And so I think that's sort of where this conversation's going from. I know that we really haven't had much talk about runway length. I know it's also an issue of certain weight restrictions on certain kinds of runways. Certainly, 737 is not going to fly into Boulder City Airport. But there are some issues that have come up about an air traffic control tower, and in terms of the likelihood of long-term support from the FAA for an air traffic control tower. Do they get closed down? Do they tend to stay open? Is there, if our air traffic is reduced, is there a likelihood the FAA would say, well, that's great, we're going to leave you with this structure we've all paid for, but there'll be no air traffic controller. So I think some of this is the discussion we've been having on an ongoing basis about the validity of having an air traffic control tower at Boulder City Airport and whether that would increase traffic and noise. So, do you have any feedback on that?
That, as Robin mentioned, the city initiated and made the application to be part of the contract tower program.
Mm-hmm.
That document focused on principally safety, and it was accepted, and the airport and the city were accepted into the program. The AIP funding now does allow for a substantial amount of funding, similar to other AIP-funded type projects. There are some limitations about, the specific technical equipment that has to go into the tower and some things like that. But, would the FAA close the tower? I've not heard of that happening in my career. I've not heard that.
Thank you.
With COVID, I'll just add, with COVID and prior to that, when there was some FAA didn't get our budget passed by Congress, there was some shortening of hours of some of the control towers, but a lot of that was just us trying to save money, and there was a look at, very low activity contract control towers. So again, it was just a method of trying to determine where hours could be shorter.
Also, I do have a question. A city can make a decision whether or not to run a control tower more than, say, 12 hours in a day, to run from 9 to 9 or 6 to 6. I know I've flown into small GA airports that have a control tower where after 9 o'clock at night it's uncontrolled space.
The operating hours of the tower, they vary by airport. It just kind of depends on the specifics of each airport. But it is important to note that if a tower were to close at say 9 p.m. in the evening, for example, the airport is still open and available for users.
Yes, I'm aware. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you. I guess this is just kind of touching on that. I guess the instead of talking about hypotheticals, the real situation here is we have a lot of tour operators happening out of Boulder City's airport. And because of the pandemic, those have more or less completely ceased, and their ability to return is in question. And so I think that's where a lot of this conversation about the air traffic control tower comes from, is that if we were to move ahead of it, but that traffic never returns. I mean, it's about 80% of the use of the airport, is my understanding. If that traffic were to not come back in any substantial way over the next 5, 10, 15 years, the sentiment is that the FAA would still continue to support the operations. I know the Boulder City does have some obligations in maintaining the building itself, but that wouldn't have any effect on the FAA's support for that air traffic control tower. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I followed your question.
Essentially, if 80% of the demand that was there that called for the air traffic control tower to deconflict the airspace, if we've had an 80% more or less reduction in the use of that airport, if not more, if we were to never get back that type of traffic because there's just not an ability to, and really kind of then not really, therefore kind of defeating the purpose of needing to deconflict the airspace because the airspace is no longer conflicted. I guess that's where my question is where does that support maintain, in being manned and being operated by the FAA, even if there is really no longer any need for it because the airspace itself is no longer conflicted?
Again, I'm not aware of that circumstance happening in my aviation career. Once the investment is made in the tower, I think we in the agency would view that as an enhancement to the level of safety.
All right, thank you.
And I think I'd add on to that. I mean, those operators are primarily serving tourists, and none of us know how the economy will actually recover or when, but I think a lot of what we're seeing is the general aviation traffic is continuing to increase throughout the pandemic. The airlines, commercial airlines, are saying they think that it's going to be the tourist industry, people wanting to get out and get away, is going to be a big push. That the slower recovery may be business travelers. So some of your operators may not come back, but to think that the demand for those tours would not come back, I think everybody would expect that they will. How fast and is kind of the unknown.
Right, and I appreciate that. I think we all hope that everybody can make it out of this okay on the other end, but we also have to look at the reality that some might not be able to, and so that was the intent of my question, is to understand, that side of the scenario, as kind of as opposed to just, continuing to grow when there's, always the potential that it doesn't. So that was where I was coming from with that question, but I do appreciate the follow-up.
Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Folda?
Thank you, Mayor. Can you hear me from over here? I know it's harder.
Can you hear Councilwoman Folda?
Yes.
Okay. Some mention was made about the entitlement funding and that there may be an option to use fiscal year 18 or 19. That funding is primarily because of our tourism industry that we have at our airport. A lot of, because of the high activity that we receive quite a bit of entitlement money because of that. So for the next, you mentioned how long for that entitlement money will be considered into the next fiscal year or 2 fiscal years based on the 2018-19 formula.
Robin, I'll let you take that one.
Okay, so Mike kind of talked about the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021 gave relief for the entitlements for next fiscal year, 22 and 23. So for next fiscal year, FAA will look at 18, 19, and 20, and then 20 for 23, they'll look at, I think it's 18, 19, and 21. So for next year, the hire of 2018, calendar year 2019, or 2020 will be how your 22 entitlements are determined. And then for 23 entitlements, it would be the best of 2018, 2019, or 2021. So at least through fiscal year 23, entitlements will be based on your highest year.
Okay, thank you, because that is a big financial consideration for future projects. That funding, if that changed drastically based on, Councilman Adams said 80%, but I think it's more 90% of our activity is based on the tour operators that are have not been in business for over a year now. So that's a big consideration when we decide on funding. Something that wasn't discussed at all tonight was, the city has a fuel farm and operates that. And could you give us a little bit of background between airports that have their own fuel farm or ones that contract them out and how those are operated?
Well, I guess I could speak, somewhat generally. We mostly, I think you see airports of, similar size to Boulder City that have, private operators that dispense and process the fuel. But there are airports that choose to engage in that part themselves. There's not a one-size-fits-all. We have seen, some smaller general aviation airports that have acquired self-fueling type equipment to have that fuel available. So it does vary, kind of, across airports.
Okay, and so what is the, I believe that airport, the charges that are charged for those gas fuel farms is similar to the formula for what regular gas stations that we use for our cars, that the prices can vary quite quickly. Is that the case with the airport aviation fuel?
It's, subject to the same industry that produces automobile fuel. So, it can change based on supply or processing plants, the refineries that produce it. So it does change and vary in price.
Okay. Does the FAA have any regulations regarding the pricing of the fuel?
No, we do not.
Okay. So we could lose money on it all day if we wanted to sell really cheap fuel, and the FAA doesn't care.
Well, if it impacts the long-term fiscal financial health of the airport, then we would be of concern.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering when that would kick in. Okay. And so is that why most often those fuel farms do charge a flow fee to maintain the operations at the airport financially?
Well, certainly, you have an investment in the equipment. The equipment requires, capital. It requires ongoing maintenance. And, you have to find some way to accommodate that. There are standards for fueling systems that are national standards. There's standards, not only for construction, but for operation. Quality of the fuel is a paramount thing that has to be maintained. So, those type of things, cost. And that's, at least in my experience, that's incorporated into the rate structure.
Okay, and then was there, the council had submitted a couple of questions, and I think most of those were answered, but was there anything else that you, in your expertise and knowledge of our airport, had any concerns that have been brought up that we haven't discussed tonight?
No, I do not have any. Robin, did you have anything?
Well, I think the only thing that I would add is that your air traffic control tower received a very high benefit cost ratio, which is a very positive thing, So I think that you should consider the fact that that shows that there is clearly some benefit from that tower. Again, it's the city's choice.
Thank you.
This is Mayor McManus. I'd like to just follow up a little bit on the fuel operations. If an airport, an entity, were to decide to have some other company run the fuel supply at an airport, is that ever done without some type of contract where the airport sponsor is paid a fee that you're aware of?
You said without a contract?
Yes, where essentially it's just like anybody who wants to sell fuel on the airfield, go ahead.
I don't recall encountering that in my experience.
And so normally something like that then is where some agreement would be made with the airport sponsor and, some other entity where a contract would be drawn up to say, yes, you will be able to sell fuel. However, you will pay the city or the sponsor some fee for doing that. And that's actually to be able to support the operations at the airport. As you've mentioned, that's one of the FAA guidelines, is that airports have to raise the revenue necessary to run the airport.
Yes,
you know,
I'll answer that.
fueling, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, it's to remain as self-sustaining as possible. So ideally, every airport would be able to raise enough money through leases and concessions and fuel flowage fees to pay all of the expenses. We all know there are airports that that's not the case, but ideally, yes, and I think that we would have concerns, I think, if there was no contract.
All right, and the aviation fuel tax, is that paid at the wholesale level or at the retail level? You had mentioned that that was one of the funding mechanisms for the FAA.
Robin, do you know? I don't know how local municipalities generally calculate that.
I think, I'm not sure. I'm not sure who collects it.
All right.
I'll be honest.
All right. Would you say it's unusual since this, the fuel installation at our airport here in Boulder City, the fuel tanks belong to the airport sponsor. They're part of the airport. Is it common or uncommon that a storage fee and a flowage fee is charged for the fuel that comes out of that facility?
In my experience, I've seen both fees in place. But again, it does depend on the specific airport and the agreement that ultimately gets negotiated.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Well, Mr. Williams and Ms. Hunt, I really do appreciate it. The information you've provided, I think, has certainly cleared some things up for me. Is there anything that you'd like to offer in closing?
No, just thank you for your time.
Well, thank you again for your input tonight.
Yes, thank you for having us.
All right, we will move then to item number 9, presentation of the Utility Advisory Committee's fiscal year capital improvement plan. Mr. Porter will kick this off.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I just want to quickly introduce Larry Carr. He's the chairman of the Utility Advisory Committee, so he will be presenting tonight. And we also have Mr. Greg Todd here, who's been a big help in participating in this whole process. So with that, he can kick it off, and you can ask him any questions you want, and we'll both try to answer them.
Thank you. Mr. Carr?
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for your time. So I believe in your packet there was, well, I've seen the packet, so there's 3 documents. There's a small revision to the fiscal year 22 capital project that we submitted earlier in the year. There's a review of the 5-year plan for the SIP programs, and there's a initial comment or recommendation for the rate study that we've got. So that's the order I'd like to go into. They're a little bit order in the packet, but as long as that's not a problem, I'd like to go in the order that I just mentioned. I think it'll go a little faster that way. So I've just got a general comment, and then I'll go through the 3 documents, and then I'll pause a little bit, and any questions you'd like to ask, I'll be happy to answer at any time. So the committee is working with the city staff, and since I don't want to miss anything, I apologize, but I'm going to read it. If I try to ad-lib too much, I'm afraid I'll miss something. So the committee is working with city staff to prioritize the UAC Utility Advisory Committee agenda items to meet the city's and the city council's time frame relating to the meetings, workshops, and council's approved deadlines. So the way I understand our resolution is that we are working to try to help everybody.
the citizens, the city manager, and the council. And then a major aspect is to try to bring our recommendations to city council as best we can. The UAC is trying to understand, discuss, and comment on the issues it understands are the priorities of the city and the council. Currently, the committee's priorities are the ongoing capital projects, the fiscal year utility budget, and additional review of the 5-year SIP program. The committee is hoping to go over Raf Tillis's final rate study report beyond the portion being discussed here tonight in greater detail beginning sometime in May. So we're trying to get everything we can to you guys by your approval timeframes, be it, we're understanding is like April. So we're working with them that's what we've been trying to do since we started is when do you need our recommendations that will help your voting or approval aspects. So for the fiscal year 22, there's really small change in that the electric SIP report, the SIP project, Electric 2105 has been moved from fiscal year 2022 to fiscal year 23 for the design portion, and the construction portion has been moved to fiscal year 24. So it's been changed to 5 projects in the electrical aspect instead of 6. And that's the only change that was in that report. Is there any comments or questions on that report? Questions or comments? Councilmember Foley?
Thank you. Yes, so I think that was something that we've discussed before is that, we're having a real time frame for these things that they can actually be done. A lot of things got backed up because of COVID. And so to have projects that can be managed in a timely manner within the budget for that year, so to move out projects is understandable and get them in order, right? Because each one of these are really depending on, especially with electric, is depending on an order of the steps that they need to be in. And so I appreciate that the committees look through that and kind of put those in the order they need to go in for things to happen and in the time frame that they could possibly do that. So.
Correct. Actually, member Greg Todd, met with the city staff to try to get a better understanding and suggest what a plan would be. And that's one of the statements I'll read out to make it clear that I don't mess up again. Councilmember Hoskins?
Oh, yes, I just wanted to talk about the E20-105 and 108. And I see that you're going to have to do 105 before you do 108, right?
If I understand, you're talking about the substation 3?
Yes.
Actually, it's the opposite way around. San Felipe needs to be done before substation 3 can be done.
Okay.
That's one of the things I think they're trying to understand. So if I say anything wrong, Dennis, please correct me. At one point, it was definitely that's the order it had to be done. Now there is a little bit of flexibility, but I think the safest aspect, if I understand correctly, is that you have the extra ability by doing the San Felipe done first, and then you have more of the load can be taken through 5.
Okay.
To take 3 down.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay. So going on to the one question then, so that was one of the things we did have is trying to go over working with the ongoing projects, how do we get everything done? So things have been started. My understanding, we had some big projects that were intended to be started around 2015, 2016, 2017. And with everything happening, just different things happening, things got pushed back, and then COVID hit, and everything really got bottled up. So you'll see that in fiscal year 2021, you've got a $19 million SIP just in electric alone. And so we focused on electric a lot in the UAC because we're trying, since that is such a large priority, and from what we were seeing, the infrastructure was more demanding of repair at the time. So that was one of the things that Greg Todd wanted to do. So we've got is the city needs a plan to organize when the project should be started or can be started,
how they will be done, and whether the projects will be done by the city or contractor. So that's things we're trying to understand, and we're trying to work on that in most of, if not all of our committee meetings, just to get a better understanding what's happening. So to get that understanding, what the plan might look like is, like I said, George Todd met with the city staff to discuss future capital projects. And so they just had a brainstorming session. I think it'd be a good way to present it. And a lot of things came out of it, and that's one of the changes that's happened. So yes, moving things around, figuring out, okay, what money might be best moved around, what projects can be moved around to actually get done, and then make sure that we're looking at the priority, so what has to be done first. And so whatever we can help with, that's all we're trying to do. We're just trying to help. We're not trying to get in the way of anything as a utility committee. We're just trying to help. So I think that was a good start, though, was just their meeting, and then our review was then on top of that to say, okay, with the information we have, this makes the best sense. So in that, most of the 5-year electrical capital improvement projects are driven by the need of the decommissioning of 2 of the old substations, 1 and 2, and rebuilding of the 2 existing substations, 3 and 4, then upgrades to substation 5. Okay. Many of the capital projects have at least 2 numbers associated with the same project. One number is created when it is introduced as a capital project, the SIP project code. This could generate more than one number if it has been project is more than in an annual SIP report. So as each year, as the SIP report is done, from what, if I've seen it correctly, is that let's just say, for instance, like the substation 3. So I'm not sure if that has a different number or not, but it could be, because I believe it's been on at least 2 SIP reports, probably at least the 2020 and 21. So a lot of times what happens, instead of keeping that number, they just sort of put them in order, and it gets a number of the order that it's in that report. So what happens is you can have 2 or even 3 numbers, because then the next number we have is the munis number. So once you actually start the project that actually budgeted for and being planned to start, then they puts in the munis, the city system, and that's the number that is most likely tracked. But you still got that number and then another number. So for instance, in your report, looking at the San Felipe, if you look at the bottom of your page for the review of the 5-year plan, you'll see that there's 2 numbers. The E2101/electric 20-108. So the first number is the munis number, and the second number is the SIP number. And that's what we've tried to explain by project numbers, and then the munis. So I just want to make sure that was clear, because that's one thing that we're trying to understand and trying to make sure that things are tracked, because that was sort of the problem we understood was when we first started this and looked at projects back from 2015 where they were saying, well, it's hard to track. And I think that's part of the problem is some of the numbering systems. So they see one number and don't necessarily see the other ones. So that's one of the things that I might repeat in my report a few times, and this is that we're hoping to they can establish a system, and they said they're working on it, to get one number for a project instead of several numbers. So the committee has discussed in some detail the capital projects that are listed in the 5-year SIP report. It is the committee's understanding that the projects are needed for the safety and reliability of the Boulder City utility infrastructure. The UAC has ongoing capital projects as a permanent agenda item, so we can continually track and review the projects that have been planned and started. The committee is trying to understand what or how many projects can be completed in each fiscal year. So we're trying to get a better understanding, as everybody is what can be done. So hopefully once the COVID starts mellowing out and everything, and they get some of the different aspects, then things will start, the infrastructure can start moving forward a lot better, redesigning, redoing the infrastructure and all that. So that is my major comments on the review. Sorry for the stuttering. Is there any comments on the 5-year capital plan?
Questions or comments on the capital improvement plan? Recommendations? Projects? Well, I'll just make one comment, and it's really not related so much to what the recommendation is there, other than the water pipeline that is out there running down to the I-11 interchange. I know that the statement had already been made at a previous budget meeting that, well, it's there, let's go ahead and use it. It's there because something else had been planned for it. So there's a considerable amount of money in there to do some work on that pipeline. I don't believe that work needs to be done. I believe the existing pipeline is sufficient. That's what the companies that use that line have stated. So we'll have a budget meeting tomorrow where we'll be talking about things in more detail. But any other questions or comments? Councilmember Fuller?
Thank you. So this is like a lot of moving parts because, we have a rate study going on right now, and I know you're going to talk about that in a minute, but also, the funding for all these things, and because these are enterprise funds, do we have the funding for all these projects at the right time when they need to be built? And how does that work with our rate study in relationship to, having the funds for those things that need to be built at this time? Because like we said, just electric alone is $19 million. It's not just a little drop in the bucket. These are, major infrastructure projects. So when considering these projects, what kind of budgetary considerations were made for those projects, and as far as their priority, or based on the funding availability?
Well, I think several things have gone about with different aspects. You have the Raftillis rate study report. You have the city reviewing it. You have the meeting that Greg attended. So a lot of these things, and they did move things off, trying to level the playing field out a little bit for the money also, so it wasn't too extreme in one year. But the big thing right now is if you've had a chance to look at some of the city managers' reports, you'll see that there's $36 million in the available funds in the utility fund. So there's $55 million overall. You've got, I think there's $1 million in restricted, billion something. There's 17 point something in revenues, but that also includes the airport and I believe the cemetery. But also you have then this $36 million for available cash. And so that's one thing we're just trying to make sure too as a committee is that it's broken out properly, that you've got the proper amount in the electric, water. And so what we've seen through Raftillis's financial part of their report is that there is enough money in the available cash, because what I like to separate it out is that make sure we're looking at the available cash and reserves are separate. You got that $17 million that you see in the city manager's report, and that's something that we would like, I think you would want to retain, because that's one of the reasons that the rate was increased in 2017, was to make sure you increase the reserves that was needed. So if you look at the available cash and then what is needed, that is why, as I'll get to here, we only go with the same recommendations of 3%, because even with the 3%, they're through the report that was given to us and the 5-year out, and if you follow how the revenues come in, there is still enough, even with the $19 million, there's still enough with available cash and the revenues coming in to support all the capital that is being proposed.
Okay. They've also talked about purchasing a program that would help better track all these projects. And so would that also track better maintenance, right? So that we don't have a year where we suddenly need $19 million of infrastructure projects, that things can be maintained more consistently across the years.
I probably better let Dennis do that so I don't misstep on that one.
There is included in next year's budget the purchase of what we call a CMMS system. So it's a computerized maintenance management system that will definitely help us not only with data going forward, but making better decisions on what maintenance needs to be done first, trying to prioritize it, trying to fund it. That will be used by all of the utilities, and I believe Public Works will be participating in that as well. So right now, a lot of that's tracked by spreadsheets and pieces of paper, and so once we get that system in place, and And it's very typical for a utility our size to have one of those systems in place. We just don't, so.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Okay, then the last, actually, it would have been your first document in the package, but the last document that I'd like to talk about is, I guess, I think we stated it as a draft rate study. So what we're looking at is based on the initial review of the Raftillis final rate study report, Rafferty's recommendations, and the effort by the USC to help the city and the council with the fiscal year 22 obligations, the majority of the committee, by a vote of 5-1, agreed to suggest the city and the city council two major recommendations. Reduce the energy charges by 3% for all customers. And just a clarification of that, because it was one of the things that, at least in the draft report, I believe it was the same thing in the final report, was one of the things I think that was somewhat confusing in the Raftillis report. I believe they showed 3% reduction in the city electrical charge, but that can't be done because that is based on an average energy of the wholesale cost. So you can't reduce that by 3%. So just to be, the way I understand it, we'll definitely clarify it in the group as we do things, is that the 3% would not affect the city because you're getting it at a wholesale cost. Then our second recommendation was to reduce the current monthly water service charge for all customers by $10 a month. And this is another one that's a little confusing. In Raftillis' report, it shows that the city is being charged the same charge as the commercial is, but in the resolution, it states that it's for other people. It's the thing that would be, that somewhat goes along with that is it says it's for government use. So I don't know if the city is considered a government or not, because in another place in the resolution, it talks about a city card. If the meter is considered a city card, and that's what the water states. So this is something we're gonna have to look in the resolution. So the only thing is I just want to make it clear that the council understands that this might or might not affect the city itself. It would definitely affect the residents. But how the city is being done, we've got to look at that more closely. So at a special meeting held on February 16th, the committee discussed, edited, and voted on the initial UAC rate study recommendations, which included the 2 suggested rate reductions and 3 other recommendations related to the final rate study report. The report was passed by a vote of 6-1. The initial recommendations are part of the report in tonight's packet and are as follows. So I'll just read them again. So this is exactly verbatim for what's in there, but I think it's important to understand. Do not increase the central service fee. So that was what was originally in the draft report. It asked for an additional fee, and then in the final it does not. So we're just basically reiterating not to do what the draft had asked. The 3 administrative funds need to be explained, and we had a meeting today, and we're in the process of trying to get a better understanding, and the city is, we're working with the city on that. Do not accept or enact any financial franchise fee relating to the Boulder City utilities now or in the future. The UAC believes that the Boulder City utilities are a nonprofit and should remain as such. While the franchise fee was removed from the final revision of the rate study, the UAC still maintains its position that this should not be enacted. And I believe that's the reason it's being put on the ballot, is just so in the future it won't be shelved and then brought back out. Raftillis' rate study report recommends extreme rate modifications to the city accounts and residential's and commercial accounts to reflect the cost of service options. They're one option. They only reviewed one option related to the cost of service. The USC does not believe these modifications should be enacted in the fiscal year 22 budget cycle or ever without further review and additional data. So to be fair, Rafferty's did state that it'd be started. They, 3% reduction for 22 and then not start until 23, but we definitely don't think it should be done early, and without reviewing more detail, we don't even think the extreme aspect should be done. We believe that the cost of service needs to be looked at a lot more closely. So in relationship to the $10 per month, that's a little confusing because just to make sure it's a little bit more, get somewhat of an understanding. So I think even in their recommendation, they just said $10 more. Now I think there's only 2 meter sizes. What you have is you have in the residential, you have a 5/8 inch meter to a 2-inch meter, and that ranges currently at $37.56 to $122.15. So that's 5/8 inch to 2-inch. So the $10 reduction is for the $37, and then it goes from there at a greater extent. And so in the report they have that. And then for the commercial, you have a 5/8 inch to a 12-inch, which I think the 10-inch and the 12-inch don't have any customers at this time. But it goes from $32.99 to $3,669.84. So there's a big range. So in some of those, they're suggesting to reduce Raftilis's aspect was a one-time reduction of as much as probably in the $3,000 range of about $1,000 a month. So right now, all we're suggesting, that's what the committee could, the majority of the committee could agree on, was that just $10 a month. But we're hoping that if the committee agrees to, if the council agrees to the reductions, then we all know that the resolutions would have to be revised. And at that time, during the revision of the resolutions, we could discuss the $10 in more detail and see if there's something we can work out that's more equitable, or if then somebody else has something that's more equitable than the drastic reductions that Raftilis stated, or if there's something else that can be done. But more than $10, but less than what they've suggested. So that's what we're hoping to look into. So the committee needs more time to discuss Raftilis' final rate study report before we can make more comments or recommendations relating to the report, especially the cost of service report aspect. And so that's what we're saying is we're hoping to do in May. And as has been discussed in some of our committee meetings, we were wondering if the council would be interested in another workshop, joint workshop. So maybe if we had one of our own in May, and then depending on if you'd be interested in June or something, or July, or whatever works for the council, we can work with. If it's early or later, then maybe so we can discuss our concerns. It'd be a lot easier than just sending a report out, and then we could also make recommendations on what would be the best way to explain our concerns on the report. And that's mine for the overall night. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, I have a comment for you. It's great news. You finally got to the end. I want to thank the committee for all the hard work. I know you've really worked hard on this, and Greg especially. You've played a very important role, and you've gotten us to this point, and I really, really want to thank you for that. Very good news. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you very much. Yeah, to echo Member Hoskins' sentiments, I really do appreciate all the hard work you guys do. I watch the videos, of the meetings, and I'll be honest, some of it goes over my head a little bit, but I really appreciate when we do get these reports like this that really does put it in layman's terms, not just what the project is, but also why it's important. I think that's really important for not just us up here making decisions to understand, but also for the public to get a little bit better understanding of what are our needs, how are we going to meet them, and so I think things like this are really helpful for all of us. My only question here, and you kind of already talked about it and touched on it with Member Folda's previous question, was it's great news. I don't want to. The recommendations to reduce rates, on the rates, the $10 per month for the service charge. But, you've also said that you do have some concerns with, some of the areas of the study as well. And so, some of these things are okay. There's some of these other things that aren't okay. But I guess the important part is that the UAC has looked at and would agree that we have the ability to both support these reduced rates, but also continue to support and address the needs of our infrastructures. Would you say that's correct?
That's correct, and that's what, so like I said, if you look at, part of the report is the financial section, which was my understanding was most of the information came from the city. So since the information is based on what the city gave, then, and you look at the flow of how the capital and the operating reserve, operation and all those expenses come into play, everything seems to be that 3% is not a problem at all. And actually, I'm assuming they probably already know that what's in the budget right now is already what Raftillis suggested as a 3% reduction. So what is being shown as the revenue coming in 2000 fiscal year 22 is the Raftillis' 3% reduction for electricity and the $10 reduction in water. And actually, it's their full reduction, to my knowledge, in water. So I believe everybody's looking at it as that's a reasonable aspect, and what the committee is hoping to do is to say that, okay, now once we've done that, let's take another look and see what it looks like after that. And so if we keep looking at it every year and we get a better understanding of the ongoing capital improvements, the capital improvements coming forward and stuff like that, and understand exactly what cash we have available and what the revenues are, then we're in good shape. And luckily, as I think everybody's been pointing out, it has looked, especially for the utilities, we didn't get hit as hard, I don't believe, in COVID as a lot of things did. So we are in pretty good shape.
And I think it just goes to show just how important a committee like the UAC is, because, you know, it's an ongoing thing. We're always going to need to be addressing our infrastructure, making sure we're keeping up. We all just saw what happened in Texas if things go ignored. So I think it's really important for this community, the work that you guys do to keep everybody informed, and so that, you know, us as a council can make informed decisions as well, to support this community and our needs. So I thank you and everybody else on that committee.
And what I would say, this is probably more my opinion, so making sure I'm not stepping out of bounds, but from what I can understand is once you get the major capital done, and that could be done as early as 2026 or 27, if it's looking more like 2026, then you could, as far as the electrical goes, like I said, I apologize, we focus so much on that because there's so much there. There's a good chance that could be down to like 3 million, and it should be under 5 million a year for capital projects. And so then you're just looking at keeping things in order and stuff like that. So it'd be in a more workable aspect. And then again, definitely see, is there any more rate reductions or whatever happens? Or maybe you're just saying, okay, with all the other inflation, you're up to what you're at. But I think it's going to look better once we get this major infrastructure. You won't be as in bad shape, because it's like, you know, it went for years and years the way it was. We could have probably done it earlier. Again, this is my view, I'm sorry. But I think once we get there, it won't be as drastic. So it won't be, you won't have to worry about it for several years.
Perfect, thank you.
Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, I just wanted to also thank you and the committee for all your hard work. I was just thrilled to pieces to see that there's a way to connect the Muni number with the CIP project number, because it does get very confusing. Now, I am curious, when it has the Munis project number, does that mean it's started? I don't know when the Munis project number is.
Essentially, when it comes to city council for approval, that's when it gets its project number.
That's when it gets.
The Munis number, sorry.
The Munis number. So when you look at this, I can say, okay, we've approved those, and they've been started. The other thing is, I really hope that when we get to the end of that cycle, it's not like it all starts all over again, and we have to.
Right.
That there is a point where there's a plateau in the amount that needs to be spent in the maintenance of the infrastructure, say electricity.
And I just do want to mention real quick, sorry, Larry, the one thing that came along with the rate study was an actual financial model. So annually, we can go in there, update all our expenses, update our revenues, and see how we're tracking with regards to those rate increases or decreases or whatever we need to do in the future. But we'll be able to start doing that as early as you know, the end of this year, and see how it's looking.
So we get to keep the model.
It's just a big giant complicated spreadsheet.
But it's something you could put in future, increase 3, decrease
You can.
2,
You can,
and be able to foresee what the
Yep.
forecast, what that looks like. Great, thank you very much.
And can I make one more comment? I just too want to thank the Utility Advisory Committee, and I thought everybody would be interested to know that we got a call from WAPA this weekend, and they had some emergency maintenance work they had to do, so we've already used the BC tap transformer to its full extent, because we had to switch the entire city over to it. We've only had a couple substations on it since we started it up, but fortunately it switched over clean, and we're on it right now. So
We always like it when the lights stay on, Mr. Porter. I'd just like to offer my thanks to, this all started some time ago. Mr. Todd, Mr. Carr, meeting at the library as an informal group, been able to get this now as an official city committee. I think one of the things that is most beneficial to the community is the transparency that you all have been able to bring to this process. Looking at the rate studies, picking them apart, looking at the projects, understanding what needs to be done when, it makes it a lot clearer, I believe, to the community to understand, look, folks, we're pretty far behind on things that didn't get done in past years, so we're having to catch up right now. And the input from the committee to the council has been enormously beneficial for myself, and I think the others have already expressed that as well. So thank you, and I'm sure we'll find a way to get a workshop schedule where we can have further discussions about the rate study, the capital improvements, all of that here in the near future.
Thank you. Greg, did you have any? Okay, just making sure. So thank you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, move to item number 10, approval for possible action, approval of a police lieutenant classification title. Chief Shea.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tim Shea, the police chief for not quite 5 years yet. And today I'm coming forward before you to ask for a reinstatement of some mid-manager positions in the police department. As you well know, by just listening to the news and seeing what's going on, law enforcement is becoming much more complex, and it has been going this way for several decades. The complexities require more supervision and more oversight, certainly not less. We have many more reporting requirements. We have many more laws that require us to make sure certain functions happen a certain way. And certainly, government leaders and our citizens, they expect our police to be efficiently, effectively, and legally managed. And they expect us to be accountable and to have close oversight to ensure that basic rights are upheld and the law is properly applied. That requires supervision. So normally in a law enforcement agency, in most agencies, you have 3 levels of supervision. You have your first line supervisors. Those are the people that are usually out in police work on the street. They are the ones responsible for oversight of our police officers and detectives. The next level up is mid-managers. Mid-managers, those positions are responsible for ensuring that the policy and directives from the top level, the executive level, are carried out. They're essential for equipment management, research and procurement, policy and procedure development and oversight, and all those things that make the system really work. The executive level, they set the direction, but the mid-managers are the ones that make sure things continue. For about 40 years, the best I can tell, Boulder City had all 3 levels. It had first level supervisors, it had mid-managers, and executive level. For example, in the budget year 1993-94, there was a chief, a deputy chief, 2 lieutenants, and 5 sergeants. Over that period, up through the time I arrived in the summer of 2016, the department was being run by a sergeant, and there were 4 sergeants doing first level supervision. That's all that remained. In 2013, there was a police analysis study done by an outside entity on the police department that identified a number of fault areas that needed to be corrected. When you read through that document, all of those fault areas directly pointed to a lack of management, leadership, and supervision. All of the areas that were found to be deficient was directly related to that. So one of the chores I was given when I first came here was to look at all of these things and begin putting a process together to put those things into place to address those shortcomings and to put things the way they should be, and at the same time, make sure operations continue the way they should. So this has been an ongoing process, and I'm to the point now where I believe that these mid-manager positions are absolutely critical, especially now since I'm the only executive person left. So one of the things I've told council in the past, and I certainly have talked about many times, is I'm a person that believes that I look at what I have, the resources I have first, and try to accomplish what I can without adding people, without asking for more money. Only ask for those things when we reach that point where we can't do it within our current resource. We have the ability to make this change, reinstate those positions without adding personnel and without negatively impacting the budget. We have it within our means. And the way I proposed to do that was to take two of our current sergeant positions, which have what are called ADP attached, that's additional duty pay. And there's quite a number of these positions, and if you're assigned one of these duties, you have a 10% added to your salary. Taking two of those positions and moving those with the ADP attached to be the base salary for a lieutenant. So there's no additional cost. So the sergeants that would move into those lieutenant positions after the selection process, if they had that top step base salary and they had their ADP already, they'll see no pay change. Their pay stays exactly the same. And earlier I was asked about, well, how do the sergeants feel about this? So what I did is I asked one of the sergeants, Sergeant Aaron Johnson, to come here and speak from one of the sergeants, one of the people who potentially could be moving into this lieutenant spot, and what they think about it and what it means to them.
Good evening, Council, Mayor, City staff. My name is Aaron Johnson. I'm a police sergeant with the Boulder City Police Department. I've been in service for 15 years here. I'd like to take a minute and expand upon what Chief Shea has been saying, but also touch on some personal experiences that I hope will help demonstrate the need for the classification of police lieutenant. Chief Shea has identified the lack of minimum management as a serious flaw in the structure of our department. Professionally, my counterparts across the valley, when I interact with them, are shocked that a sergeant would report directly to the chief of police, as we currently do. In the past, we've had Commander Spire here. He has kind of filled two hats as the role of middle management, and also, more appropriately, his position is aligned with the executive leadership. But currently, we do not have that, and we as sergeants report directly to the chief of police. And when I say my counterparts across the valley, I'm not referring to other sergeants. I'm really referring to other lieutenants and captains throughout the valley who perform similar functions as many sergeants in the department currently do. Sometimes this poses an operational problem because they often look to departments, to those in the departments that are of similar rank to solve their operational needs and interagency planning. But for me, on a personal note, this is more than just middle management. It goes a lot further than just oversight and supervision. It also dives into what we would call professional development. I am a candidate for the 285th session of the FBI National Academy. To get selected for that, I had to put my application in, and I had to receive a waiver or special approval from the FBI. Not because I didn't have the education requirements, not because I didn't have the physical requirements, it's because I had the rank of sergeant and not lieutenant. The experience was there, the education is there, the fitness is there, but I did not have the rank. I received the approval, was granted permission to attend the 85th session, and I will be representing the city and the police department with other executives from around the world. Other agencies across the valley do not require these special permissions. Mesquite doesn't require the special permission. UNLV doesn't require it. School police doesn't require it. And certainly Metro, Henderson, and North Las Vegas don't require it because they have these steps in place. Currently, the Nevada Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training will not issue management level certificate to anyone in our agency because we do not have management level positions. I've taken these management level courses. I've passed them. I've fulfilled the requirements. The academics is there. The position is not there. Currently, our own chief of police is not eligible to receive an executive level certificate because he does not lead managers. Because of the duties and responsibilities of our sergeants, who interact most daily with lieutenants and captains who perform these similar functions, we operate at this level out of necessity because of the functions that we perform. Not necessarily the titles that we hold. A sample would be when Vice President Pence had his rally here in Boulder City. From the moment it was announced till the time it was over, I was dealing with captains, lieutenants from Metro, from Henderson, and special agents with the FBI. New Year's Eve on the Strip, multiple lieutenants I worked with, multiple lieutenants from Metro and Henderson are the folks that I worked with. Our joining forces folks work with mid-level managers, and yet they're sergeants. Our current oversight and development of our communication systems for both the police department and the fire department is dealt with at a much higher level than the titles that we hold here in Boulder City. Let's see, I just want to just let you know that it's just not personal. Unanimously, the supervisors of the Boulder City Police Department are in concurrence with Chief Shea and when he says we have a need for the classification of a police lieutenant. But for me personally, it goes a little bit beyond that. I talk about professional growth, professional development, and I do believe it's long overdue. Thank you.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to bring up is that in going back over the history of the department, the city has not hired a inside candidate police chief in over 20 years. That's pretty unusual. Everybody's come from the outside, and the reason being is because they can't qualify. We have no career development program here for our people at all. They have nowhere to go. They make sergeant, that is it. They can't go anyplace. Even if a police chief's job opened in a smaller city somewhere in the state, they can't apply because they don't qualify. So we've capped our people at sergeant, and that's it. So we have the talent. Believe me, we have the talent. I can't replace the commander with one of our sergeants. They don't qualify. I have to go outside the department, and that's very problematic for us. So it's critical, I believe, for the future of the department and for the health of the department and for the city that we have these things in place so that we can have a choice of inside or outside. Right now, we have no choice. And the other thing is that the way we're asking this be set up is that these positions would remain in the supervisor's bargaining unit. So we're not taking anything from the bargain. We're taking no work from that bargaining unit and moving it out of that represented body at all. It's staying within that represented body. And we have a buy-off from the union before we even presented this to you that they endorsed this program. In fact, they were the one that gave us the key to make it all work. So with that, if I say I have any questions, I didn't want to regurgitate everything I put in the staff report, but I want to touch upon the key points, being that one, it's something we need. It's something we should have. We can do it without spending any additional money, and we don't have to hire any additional people.
Questions or comments? Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, I'd just like to make a comment and make sure that I have you correct. You say there will be no additional cost, and the sergeants will not be moving up, so you'll not be replacing those sergeants. Is that correct?
What will happen is there'll be a selection process just virtually identical to how a person gets promoted to sergeant from officer. In the past, I believe there was probably a you're my lieutenant and selection done. I don't believe in doing it that way. I believe in having a much more formal selection process put into place, so I don't participate in the selection process. There'll be a selection board set up, and they'll go through a selection process with that board. They will rate those candidates, and we'll have a ranking order, and those positions will be filled. The sergeants understand that the position that they're currently in will go away, and they may not be the person moving up to lieutenant. They may not be the selected person. They all understand that that's what may happen, and that's fine. They understand the department needs it more than the individual does.
Thank you. I'm very encouraged by this because I think we need to have promotions within, and I know we've had a lot of good people over the past years, but they've not really been able to be promoted. So I thank you for this.
Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for your compelling argument. That was, I think we're at a disadvantage if we're going out there and you're not on the same field with the other people that you're doing the work out there with. Also, yeah, I was going to ask again, the fact that it's not about hiring more people and it's not about increasing our expenses. It's about having a more efficient department, and it's about giving people who earn it, I mean, in terms of deserving it and work for it, an opportunity to move up, to feel that they are in a management position.
And again, they are absolutely critical. I mean, if we didn't need these positions, I wouldn't be standing before you asking about it just because I thought it was a good thing for the individuals. In this case, it's both things are needed. The positions are needed. The complexity of our profession has become such that mid-managers are absolutely essential, and departments have been increasing those numbers since the 90s, not decreasing them. And frankly, we need them. It's more than one person can really do. And even the person that was before me, I read his notes, and he identified the exact same things during his short tenure here, but he's read the same report and came to the same conclusions. He just wasn't able to act on them.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you. Yeah, no, I really thank you for coming here and addressing this issue. You know, I'm someone with no law enforcement background, you know, in myself, my family, anything like that. So, you know, if I was looking at the ladder, I would have been blind to the fact that there was a rung missing from it. And I think it's really important. You addressed all the many reasons why, you know, this is important to have that step there, not just for the advancement, but for the operation of the police department as a whole. My one question with regards to hiring, you know, and all those sorts of questions, we talked about it in the briefing, but with more cops, does this have any effect on our compliance with the More Cops program or anything like that?
No, our numbers are required to be 30 paid for by any other means other than more cops or the crime prevention tax money. These positions remain general fund positions, so they have no impact on our numbers for more cops.
Thank you.
Councilmember Folda?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to reiterate what's already been said, you know, I don't think I've ever met a more budget conscious like chief than we have in Chief Shea. I mean, really, you know, I know he's bought some things out of his own pocket sometimes. And so, you know, I do appreciate the entire department, the entire department really looking at that and working together as a team to make that happen. And, you know, this is really important. You've already said that, you know, about how complex the police work is. If something goes wrong, it goes wrong really fast. And so to have this supervisor is really holding too many hats at once, important things will eventually go by the wayside. And that's, you know, that can be dangerous with the line of work that you have to work in. And so, yeah, I just appreciate everyone working as a team to make that happen and to get it all in line. It's already been agreed. We already have the bargaining union in line and before it's even brought to us. So I appreciate that, all the work that's been done to get to this point. So thank you, Chief.
Thank you. And it wasn't very much money, Mrs. Shea, just a little bit.
And I know you've been working on trying to get that Model A up to standards for us, but Again, Chief, I do appreciate the work that's been done on this. Oftentimes we talk about pendulums that swing back and forth. You and I talked about it yesterday that, at one point, our police department certainly appeared to be top-heavy. There was every rank possible, it seemed, there was a position for. So, it appears to me, and again, I don't know all the details on it, that it was, well, we'll just take a chainsaw to this and we'll cut it all back. So that's how we wound up with, the sergeants, the patrol officers, and one or two people at the head of the department. Boulder City is often called Mayberry. This isn't, Andy talking to Barney. I mean, it's a more formal department. It's a more professional department, and it needs that type of management experience. You can't be there for every situation. The only concern I do have, and this is more of a general concern, anytime there are people who are in management, also belonging to the same bargaining units or unions as other employees, sometimes that leads to conflict. Now, I do understand with a small department like that, like we have, that may not be an issue, but that's always a concern for me when the management and the employees are within that same bargaining unit. But once again, I believe that something like that for our situation, and we're only talking about two people here, I certainly don't see that as being something to say no to this process. I think it can still work.
Yeah, I believe so too. My experience has been that in the unions I had where I was before, sergeants and deputies were in one bargaining unit, lieutenants and captains were in another, and then majors and bureau chiefs and such, we were in none. But it did have some conflicts, but luckily some of us have experience in dealing with those and telling people how to do those inner workings with each other to make it all work harmoniously. One thing that wouldn't happen is lieutenants would not be disciplining sergeants. Discipline is held at the executive level, not at the mid-manager level. They might recommend it, but they don't do it. So that's usually where the rub would come if you have to discipline somebody like that, but they won't be disciplining people. That's something I unfortunately has to fall to me.
Well, it's not always discipline, though. Sometimes it's some on the positive side or on the plus side. But again, I think that where we're at, it's something that's acceptable to go forward with. And I have no doubt that this is necessary. I think, as Councilmember Folda pointed out, you individually cannot be expected to properly manage a police force of the size we have, even though it's considered a small force. So I absolutely think this is a necessary change. Any other questions or comments? Anyone wishing to make a motion then on Resolution 7251, establishing the classification titles?
Yes, sir. I would like to make a motion for Resolution 7251 that we approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Anyone wishing to make a motion on Resolution 7252, a resolution approving an amendment to the agreement and the City of Boulder City and the bargaining unit?
Yes, I would like to make a motion to accept resolution number 7252.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate this, and I think you'll be very pleased at the results you're going to see.
Thank you. And thank you, Sergeant Johnson, as well. All right, we will then move to item number 11, for possible action, appointments to the Ballot Question Committee.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. City Council approved 2 ballot questions for the purpose of funding an aquatic center We did seek volunteers to write arguments. We placed it on social media and in the Boulder City Review. We received one volunteer who's offered to write the arguments advocating for the city to expend $7 million from the Capital Improvement Fund. So staff is requesting that you would appoint Bobby Wilson and direct the acting city clerk in consultation with the city attorney to write the remaining arguments.
Thank you. We will open nominations then for this committee or appointment to the ballot question committee. Councilmember Bridges?
Yes, I would like to nominate Bobby Wilson.
Are there any other names that anyone wishes to nominate? All right, I'll move to close the nominations. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of closing nominations?
Aye.
Any opposed? And with that, Ms. Wilson is appointed. Thank you. Item number 13.
Mayor, and we also need you to direct city clerk in consultation with the city attorney
So
to
directed.
write the remaining arguments, please.
So directed.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Bryce Bolt, Administrative Services Director. We have before you this evening for possible action, discussion, and possible staff direction regarding the recruitment for a city clerk. And similarly to the options previous for appointed vacancies, this could be done with an executive recruitment firm, an in-house recruitment, or a hybrid thereof. I did have the opportunity to speak with GovHR today. They're the ones doing the recruitment for the city manager and city attorney. And you might remember from their proposal, they reminded me that their first recruitment was $20,000, their second was $19,000, and for this one they'd say $18,000. So they did offer up a discount because they already have all the city data, they have the brochures developed, and they're having a relationship with the city. So I just offer that up as information relative to that particular executive firm. If I can answer any questions.
Thank you. And in addition to that information, it does so happen I was speaking with the mayor of Henderson, Mayor March, and they are also going through the process currently of recruiting for a city clerk. So there is a pool of candidate. I mean, obviously, Henderson can't, provide us with that information, but there is an existing pool out there that has indicated interest in a city clerk position. So I just want to make that known as well, that there is a process going on with our neighboring city. Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you. I'll just make the comment that I think we already have established this relationship with GovHR. They were the ones I personally was most impressed with what they had brought forward. For me, I think it would be the logical step to move forward with them in similar fashion, since they do, like I said, we've kind of already begun that process. So I think that would be of benefit to us to help kind of streamline this all together. So that's where my head's at right now. But as always, I'm willing to listen to see where everyone else's head's at.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Bridges?
Yes, I'm going to go along and agree with that using GovHR for this also, because, not necessarily because they're going to charge less, but the fact that they already have the information, that there's the literature created, and I too am very impressed with I'm doing some more research on them on the internet and so on, and they have quite a lot of experience doing this. So.
Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes. Do we have any idea what Henderson is paying, or do you have any more information than what you've given us?
I don't. I've not seen their, what their posting was for the position.
Henderson's doing an internal recruitment.
Yes. Well, if that's your question, Yes, they are handling this in-house. They are not using a recruiting firm. Mr. Bull, could you explain what the hybrid model is, and is that something that the existing recruiting firm has said they're willing to do?
I talked to them about that quite some time ago when we were looking at the other recruitments, and we've used it for department heads where they do basically the recruitment, they do the initial vetting, and then really they hand off those candidates internally, and we do organize the interviews and any other hurdles that we want to put the candidates through, and in the background, and that's handled internally. So kind of the first half is done with the recruitment firm, and then the second half is kind of done in-house.
Okay, so the in-house portion of it would be what?
Would be setting up the interviews and interview questions, and then doing the background check and any other certification, education checks, things of that nature.
Okay, do you see any advantage one process over the other?
I haven't seen an advantage. You know, there's probably $1 consideration on the hybrid, but really one either internal all the way or external all the way I'd see that as probably the smoothest flow to it. So the advantage of that hybrid really is for the dollars. It doesn't save us any time necessarily or anything like that.
And what do you think the dollar difference would be?
Well,
first let me ask this. Has GovHR indicated that they're amenable to such a process?
They are, and they submitted a proposal to me today.
Oh, well.
Yes, and that's where I got the number that they would reduce their recruitment costs, and they'd so they actually have kind of some other set costs, but they were at $20,000, $19,000. This recruitment would be $18,000. Their expenses is $1,500, and that wouldn't change, and they're $2,500 on their advertising costs, and that remains the same. But so we'd be with their current proposal that they submitted just today, it'd be a savings of $1,000 from their regular rate, or I'm sorry, $2,000 from their regular rate, and $1,000 from their discounted rate.
Okay, so essentially, if we do a hybrid model with them, they're not really giving us anything other than the fact that they're dealing with us right now.
Yes, yeah. This is not their hybrid.
Okay, so even though we would be doing a considerable, I shouldn't say we, it would be you. Even though you would be doing a considerable amount of the work, that's not really reflected in the price that they would make available.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't make myself clear. That their proposal wasn't the hybrid. Their proposal was the entire recruitment. I haven't talked to them about a hybrid. I would, if I were, I would hope that they'd half their proposal and get it at about 50%, because they're just doing the front end of it. And they have our information and data and brochure developed already. So they'd vet that first, they'd get the applicants in, they'd do that first round of vetting, then they'd hand that off to the city.
Okay, but we're not sure of what the cost factors would be involved there?
No, sir.
All right. Councilmember Folden?
Thank you, Mayor. So another additional question with with GovHR, if there was a hybrid model with them where they do the initial part, who would be the one to really cut down the applications? Would they be reduced before they came to us? Would they do that portion of that? Say, because I know with our city manager position, we had nearly 100 applications. Would you be receiving that many, or would they reduce that before it came to staff?
They'd reduce that.
They would do that part. Okay.
I mean, we could propose whatever we wanted, obviously, in a hybrid, but in the past, that initial cut is done by the recruiter.
Okay. If it was done in-house, I know the staffing is pretty tight in your office. You asked for additional part-time or full-time there. So would that be something manageable to do, possibly hundreds of applications coming through the office for doing an in-house process? How would that work for?
Well, that certainly would be a dedication of resources, no doubt about that. And then, we'd want to move the process quickly, so that'd be time and resources. And absolutely, it would I'd have to get my full staff on that for some period of time. I'd say, particularly that first cut, if you had 100, you'd have to cut that down, and that would require development of some type of matrix that you'd apply, and it would certainly be time consuming, no doubt about that, but we can handle it.
Right. And you have a system currently in place for, because you do that normally for staff.
Right, for regular recruitments, we do
recruitments.
that. For instance, these lieutenants would be internal recruitments, but we'll still have to set up an application process, an interview process, and move it along that way.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Adams?
I guess just with those comments made, I think it would probably behoove us to, at the very least, do a hybrid, if not going directly with them, rather than I'm not sure that trying to do it internally is necessarily the appropriate move at this point.
Anyone else? Yeah, I agree with that also on a couple of levels that one, there is a pool out there currently for our neighboring city. Two, we've been dealing with this recruiting firm, so they're familiar with Boulder City and our government and that sort of thing. And I do feel that we can get through the process and have them do the initial review of candidates and then have that turned over to Mr. Bolt and his team to move forward with the rest of the process. Any other thoughts, Councilmember Bridges?
I guess I'm leaning more towards the executive search firm, the entire process, only because of reading the request for assistance in your office. It sounds like you're already at peak work for the people that do work in your office, and that to add that requirement in terms of hiring a clerk is a commitment, is an extra commitment of resources and time. So it sounds like, for me, that going with the full program like we are with the city attorney and city manager would probably be the best way to go.
Any other thoughts? Councilmember Adams?
Because we are kind of talking hypothetical here, in that we don't know, if GovHR is interested in doing a hybrid thing. I don't see why they wouldn't be. But is it possible that we can, I do know we want to move forward with this in a very quick manner, in a timely and efficient manner. But is it something in which we should at least engage them and see what that might look like, so that we can come back and look at it and say, this process would work, a hybrid model would work based off of this in a way that does work with our staff, or whether or not we should go full, or should we really be making the decision right now tonight? I understand the importance of either one. I'm trying to build some consensus here on what the right path is.
Anyone else? Councilmember Folda?
Thank you. No, I think it would be beneficial to do the hybrid. Just working with GovHR has been good, but getting it back in-house would logistically move things, I think, faster. And it's a little easier to communicate with someone who's in closer proximity and availability than what GovHR can provide. So that's kind of my thought on that. as having that hybrid. I think they would, I would prefer in-house completely, except for that GovHR does already have a lot of the legwork already completed with the other recruitments that they're working on right now. So that's kind of my thought on that,
Anyone else? Well, I would make a motion then, based on what my thoughts are and what I've heard here then, I would make a motion to direct staff to request from GovHR their ability and desire to engage in the hybrid solution where they would do the initial recruiting and evaluation and then have our city staff complete the interview process.
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Mayor, I do have, so, and then, that can be, with that, I think once the numbers are cut down, it would be much more manageable to be able to do the recruitment part and stuff. And you guys need more practice. You haven't been hiring anyone for over a year now.
That's
so.
true, I'm getting rusty.
So I think that would, definitely having someone so that our staff doesn't have to go through that elimination process, getting it down to, a number that our staff can handle, and then going from there, I think would be beneficial.
Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, I just have a question. The way it's worded, is that, yes, we're going to go with a hybrid, or are we going to have that information brought back to us so that we can determine whether or not that's feasible?
Well, that would be further direction that at the next council meeting, and again, the way this agenda item is written, we're not in a position to make a decision unless we were to go completely in-house on it without having a contract and that sort of information to be able to approve. So that's why the motion was made as it was, would be to get the information back from GovHR, and then if that motion is acceptable, that staff would then bring that to us at our March 23rd council meeting for a decision or further discussion if needed.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you, Mr. Bolt.
Thank you, sir.
All right, that brings us then to item number 14, public comment. Again, our ranks have thinned out considerably in the council chambers. However, anyone wishing to make public comment who's present? All right, we will go to the phone line. Anyone wishing to call during our final public comment period? Comment can be on any issue. The phone number is 702-589-9629. Again, this is our final public comment period. The phone number is 702-589-9629.
Public comment.
Yes, I'd like to make public comment.
Okay, state your name for the record.
Sure. It's Judy DeShane, And my public comment is I would just hope that the council will set pay ranges like they did for city manager and city attorney prior to hiring anybody, so you know what you're looking at for money. So I would just urge the council to please set pay ranges for the city clerk's position. Thank you.
Thank you. This is the final public comment period. The phone line is available. Anyone wishing to call, the phone number is 702-589-9629.
Public comment.
Yes, my name is Glenn Fain. I'd like to make a public comment.
Go ahead.
Yes, on the hiring of the replacement people for the city attorney, manager, and city clerk, I would like to see the city, if they can, look from within. Michael Mays is currently the temporary, I guess, for lack of a better term, but as far as I know, he's been doing a good job. I'd look seriously at putting him in a permanent position. Tammy's been with the city for a long time in the city clerk's office. She has a lot of knowledge about our city and how things are run and stuff like that. Give serious consideration to looking at her. I don't know too much about the acting city attorney that's currently there, but I don't know if her qualifications are up to what we need or not, but if they are, possibly look at her. Save some time and effort. Just look from within. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, this is our final public comment period. The phone line is available. The number is 702-589-9629. Once again, this is the final public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak, the phone number is 702-589-9629. Madam City Clerk, were there any written or voicemails submitted for the final public comment?
There were none.
Thank you. And this is our final public comment period. The phone number is 589-9629. All right, hearing no others, we will close the final public comment period and move to our last item, council reports. Councilmember Folda.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to reiterate that our school system that's in Clark County School District has started reopening plans for returning students to school. There are still some on the, it's a hybrid, so you can be in person or not. So in that happening, our school zones have returned to the 15 miles an hour, so please watch out for our students who might be out on the road. The school food distribution center has been moved to the high school, so anyone in need of meals for their children can receive those over at the high school. And then also through our CARES funds that was distributed through emergency aid, if you have any child care or distance education costs due to COVID, you can receive assistance through emergency aid partner. So, and then last is that tomorrow we have our City Council budget workshops. So tomorrow at 1 o'clock, we'll be back here to discuss the budget and capital improvement projects and our enterprise funds. So anyone interested in where your money goes and where you want it to go, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hoskins.
I have nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bridges.
Yes, I just want to again address the needs of residents of Boulder City with respect to rent and mortgage and utility assistance. And like Councilwoman Folda said, child care and distance education assistance. EABC has resources available to help you and your family if you've been impacted by an emergency or by COVID-19. They also have food available through their pantry to help with your monthly expenses. There's a website now, very lovely one, emergencyaidbc.org for more information. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Adams.
Thank you. At our last Board of Health meeting, we obviously addressed the many concerns of the pandemic. There is definitely some good news on the horizon with supply for vaccines seeming to increase. So that should be, these issues of supply versus demand should be hopefully resolving themselves. But, there's also at the same time, as we see these numbers go down and we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, there's always that concern that we don't, jump the gun on this. And, we just want to make sure that we're all patient, that as long as we kind of keep the course, we should hopefully be returning soon. For me, the bigger discussion, though, and one that hasn't been, it does get talked about, but not too much, is overdose and drug addiction. And that certainly has seen a huge increase in the last year. And that was something we actually had just started a data to action plan and looking at the numbers of overdose deaths. And it's no surprise things like synthetic opioids, fentanyl, things of that nature. We've all heard of that huge increase in use among users, and so that's obviously a big problem. But the one that still remains at the top of the list is psychostimulants, things like meth, Adderall. It's very challenging to address these things, and some of the biggest challenges are the stigma that is associated to addiction. And so they're hoping with these numbers, like I said, that the plan is to look at the data that's been collected, continue to collect that data, and then actually turning it into an action plan to actually address, so that we can provide help. Because that's the biggest thing. This is a public health issue. It's not. It's not necessarily that these are bad people or criminals or anything like that, but if it can be looked at from a public health issue, is how we could really address it. So I think it's important that everybody remembers that. And if you or anybody is suffering from addiction, or somebody, that there is help out there, and don't hesitate to reach out, because it's never too late to try and start down that path. So that's all I have for tonight.
Thank you. I would like to say that in following on with what Councilmember Adams just said, I was at a Convention and Visitors Authority meeting this morning, talking about the first convention since the lockdown over a year ago is scheduled for the end of June. The World of Concrete, it's an extremely large show. As we try and work out of this pandemic, I really want to emphasize to people how important it is to have the vaccine. I know some people are hesitant about that. We will probably be getting our next age group of people, 55 and older, into the process within probably a week or so. Pay attention, if you would, to when that announcement occurs, and when it does occur, please contact the number that we have for the city. Get your appointment scheduled. Get in and do that. As far as people being hesitant about this, it did come about very quickly. There's no question about that. But with the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, I think people need to understand the research had been going on into that type of vaccine for a decade. So when this came up, the research that had been going on for so long fit into the way this virus acts. And that virus was able to be confronted with these vaccines fairly quickly. So if you are hesitant about it, please get out there and read some accurate information. Go to the CDC's website, the FDA's website. There's a lot of bad information out there about this. But more importantly, if we are not able to get enough people vaccinated, we're never going to get out of this. And the economy can't stand this forever. We're talking about the programs that we have for folks to get aid. Those programs will end as well. If you are having difficulty with your utility bill, please contact the city. Please do that sooner rather than later. There are programs that can help people who have been hurt by this pandemic. So let's work together. We always do that here in Boulder City. Let's get this over as fast as we can. I certainly want to have a great jamboree this year, so get the shot, get the jab. Thank you, and with that, we're adjourned.